It has been another week of terrible wildfires in the nation's west, with the worst of those fires in southeast Oregon, covering an area about the size of New York City. One more consequence of the worst drought in 1,000 years. Ben Tracy looks at what's behind what some are now calling the megadrought.
The American West was once seen as a place of endless possibilities. Grand vistas, bountiful resources, and cities that somehow grew out of deserts. Now manifest destiny has become a manifest emergency. A scorching drought made worse by climate change is draining reservoirs at an alarming pace, fueling massive wildfires and deadly heat waves, and withering one of the most important agricultural economies in the country.
I'm really concerned, really worried.
Joe Del Bosque has been growing melons and other crops in California's Central Valley since 1985.
These are melons right here, cantaloupes and honeydews.
He's weathered droughts before, but nothing quite like this.
That's right. Well-watered field. It's been watered very efficiently.
And this looks like a completely different world over here.
This is a fallow field.
He showed us this field of dirt. There's not enough water to plant a crop here this summer.
How much of your land have you left unplanted this year?
About a third.
A third?
Yes, that's significant. If that water doesn't get here, we will start to lose our crops. Some of our crops will probably die.
Del Bosque's water comes from the San Luis Reservoir, which is at just 30% of its capacity. The state has now cut water deliveries to many of its farmers, who supply much of the nation's fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Del Bosque paid for water he now can't get.
I'm sure you talk to your neighbors. I'm sure you talk to farmers up and down the valley. What are people saying?
Well, a lot of them are worried and a lot of them are mad. If we have no water, we can't farm. If we get no water next year, these trees won't get water. They're going to die.
This devastating drought is not confined to California. It's impacting nearly all of the West. The red and brown colors on this map are what the government calls extreme and exceptional drought.
This drought is really bad. It's one of the worst handful of years since the year 800 AD.
So that's really bad.
Yeah, it's really bad in any context.
Park Williams is a hydroclimatologist at UCLA. He says this is not just one long, hot, dry summer, but instead it's what scientists call a megadrought.
This is really the 22nd year of a long drought that began in the year 2000. There are some rings that are thick and some rings that are thin.
Williams and his colleagues know this from studying the rings on trees, which show how much they grow in any given year.
So you could literally look at how close the rings are and say there was a 2-year drought or a 20-year drought.
In the West, we can actually do this with our eyeballs. The last 22 years actually rank as the driest 22-year period in at least 1,200 years, based on tree ring records. And so humans now are contending with a water limitation crisis in the West that modern society in this region has not yet had to contend with.
We've long known the limitations of the arid West. In the mid-1800s, the U.S. government sent geologist John Wesley Powell to survey the western U.S. water supply and bring back recommendations.
He warned that the West did not have enough water for a really widespread population, and we kind of bent the rules along the way when we started figuring out how to dam up the Colorado River and divvy it up to the western states.
The 726-foot dam, towering from the canyon bed of the Colorado, is the 8th wonder of the world.
Hoover Dam, an engineering marvel, was thought to be a concrete solution. It harnessed the mighty Colorado River and created Nevada's Lake Mead, still the nation's largest reservoir. This water supply is what made western cities such as Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Las Vegas possible, and allowed us to create some of the richest farmland in the country. But the predicted water supply from the Colorado River was based on 20 abnormally wet years at the beginning of the last century. Now 40 million people in 7 states depend on it.
We did it, we built it, we've become reliant on it. So we have to deal with what we have.
Pat Mulroy is the former head of the Southern Nevada Water Authority. We met her on the shores of Lake Mead, which has sunk to its lowest level ever. In the year 2000, the water came right up to the top of Hoover Dam. During the megadrought, the lake has dropped more than 140 feet.
So when it loses this much water, to me that is an enormous wake-up call.
Next month, the federal government is expected to make an unprecedented decision, declaring a first-ever shortage on the river, triggering cuts to the water supply in Arizona and Nevada that will cost some farmers 25% of their water.
So it's a tipping point. It's an existential issue for Arizona, for California, for Nevada. It is a river system and a water supply that cannot fail.
And so without this, are places like Phoenix and Las Vegas and Los Angeles possible?
No, absolutely not. They're not possible. At the end of the day, this is gone, and those cities and that economic base is in dire jeopardy.
What the West needs more than anything is snow. Snowpack in the mountains melts throughout the summer and flows into reservoirs.
In the West, snow is like our battery. It's where we store water.
J.T. Rieger is a water scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Now we're getting less snow. The snow season is markedly shorter.
Is this something that is caused by climate change or something that's just made worse by climate change?
I think it's something that's definitely made worse by climate change.
Climate change is making the West hotter and drier, which means more rain than snow is falling, and much of that is evaporating.
Over the long term, what we're seeing with our satellite data is a picture of continual drying.
A NASA satellite is documenting the loss of water stored in the mountains, reservoirs, and underground aquifers.
And is that what we're seeing here? Are we seeing that progression?
That's exactly right. So these are some images that we've taken from April 2010, 2015, and 2021, showing this steady drying progression of water in the West.
Given how severe this drought is and how long-term, how long would it take to recover from something like this?
We would need a solid decade of really wet years, which is probably just not going to happen.
Joe Del Bosque has already let 70 of his farm workers go and isn't sure how long his farm will survive if the drought drags on.
If you were starting all over, knowing what you know about this climate now, would you do this?
I don't know. It was like a dream for me to be able to do this because I was a son of farm workers. I have a lot of people that depend on me. There's hundreds of people working in the fields, picking melons, that are people just like my ancestors that came here, work hard to try to make a living for their kids so their kids could go to college like I did. And this is going to end their dream too.